Red lights flooded the command deck as the first warning tone cut through the silence. Commander Threx Kalor gripped the edge of his console and stared at the small blue marker on the tactical display. A single outpost. No shields worth mentioning. No warships in orbit. Just a lonely station drifting on the edge of human territory, far from any major fleet. "Confirm the target," Threx said, his voice steady, despite the excitement building in his chest. "Confirmed, Commander," answered his second, a young officer named Vesa. "Outpost designation Kestrel 9. Human records list it as a minor supply and research station. Population under 200. No listed defense fleet." Threx allowed himself a small smile. After 3 long years of war against species who fought back with everything they had, this felt like a gift, a soft target. A place to remind his crew what an easy victory felt like. "All ships, prepare for approach," he ordered. "This will not take long." His fleet of 6 cruisers dropped out of high-speed travel at the edge of the system, close enough to see the outpost gleaming faintly against the black of space. It looked exactly like the reports described. Old plating, slow-rotating sections, a handful of docking arms that looked like they had not been upgraded in years. "Too easy," a small voice whispered in the back of his mind. He ignored it. "Open a channel," Threx said. "Let them know we are here before we begin." The channel opened with a burst of static, then silence. No panicked voice answered, no plea for mercy, no frightened commander trying to negotiate, just quiet, empty air. "They are not responding," Vesa said, frowning at her display. "Then they have nothing to say," Threx replied. "Weapons free, target their communication array first. We take the station intact if possible." The order rippled down the chain of command, and moments later, the first volley of energy fire lit up the dark space between the fleet and the outpost. Threx watched the beams streak toward their target, confident and unhurried, the way a hunter watches a trap close on something that cannot escape. Then something strange happened. The beams should have struck bare hull plating. Instead, they hit something invisible, a shimmer of light rippling outward like water disturbed by a stone. The outpost defenses had not failed. They had not even been visible until the moment they were tested. "Report," Threx snapped, his earlier confidence cracking at the edges. "Shields," Vesa said, disbelief coloring her voice. "The outpost has shields, powerful ones. Our sensors did not detect them before firing." Threx felt a cold weight settle in his stomach, but he pushed it aside. Shields were not victory. Shields could be worn down. "Continue the assault," he ordered. "Concentrate fire on a single section. Nothing holds forever." His ships adjusted, focusing their combined firepower on one point along the outpost's outer ring. The shimmer of the shield brightened, absorbing hit after hit, but it did not break. If anything, it seemed to be holding with an efficiency that should not have been possible for a station this size. "Commander," Vesa said quietly, "our sensors just picked up new readings from inside the station. Power signatures we have never seen before. Multiple sources, all active at once." Threx stared at the display, watching the numbers climb steadily upward. Every instinct honed over a decade of warfare told him something was deeply wrong. A supply station did not carry weapons systems capable of generating readings like these. A supply station did not have shields strong enough to shrug off a full fleet volley without so much as flickering. "Pull back the frontline ships," he said, trying to keep his voice level. "Reassess before we commit further." But it was already too late to simply walk away. The outpost defenses activated fully, and for the first time since the beginning of the attack, Kestrel 9 answered back. Points of light bloomed along the station's hull, dozens of them, each one resolving into a weapon emplacement that had been perfectly hidden only moments before. They opened fire in unison, a coordinated barrage that moved with a precision no defensive garrison should have possessed. Threx watched in stunned silence as one of his cruisers lost power across its entire forward section in a single strike, its shields collapsing instantly under the weight of concentrated fire. "That is not possible," Vesa whispered. Threx said nothing. He was too busy watching his easy victory disappear. Inside Kestrel 9, in a control room buried 3 levels beneath the outer hull, Sergeant Mara Osei stood at her station with her arms folded, watching the same battle unfold on a different set of screens. Around her, a dozen operators worked in calm, practiced silence, their hands moving across their controls with the ease of people who had done this 100 times before, because they had. "Enemy fleet reducing speed," said a young technician named Daniel Cole from beside her. "They are pulling back their lead ships." "Let them think about it," Mara said, watching the tactical display update in real time. "They will come back in. They always do." She had seen this pattern before during training exercises, watching simulated enemies hesitate the moment their easy target turned out to have teeth. Confusion always followed the same predictable path. First disbelief, then anger, then a decision to press forward anyway, because pulling back completely felt too much like admitting a mistake. "Colonel Whitfield wants a status report," Daniel said, glancing toward her. "Tell him the shell held," Mara replied. "Tell him the fleet just found out Kestrel 9 is not what their intelligence said it was." Daniel relayed the message, and Mara allowed herself a brief, quiet moment to think about how strange her life had become. 2 years ago she had been an ordinary soldier stationed on a border world, running standard patrols and filing standard reports. Then she had been selected, quietly and without fanfare, for a program she had never heard of before. She had trained for months in facilities that did not appear on any official map, learning tactics and systems that felt more like science fiction than military doctrine. Kestrel 9 was the result of that program. On paper, it was nothing. A minor supply depot on the edge of contested space, staffed by a skeleton crew, defended by outdated equipment. In reality, it was one of Earth's most carefully hidden secrets, a forward operating base for a unit so specialized that most of the regular military did not know it existed. They called themselves the Kestrel Division. Mara watched the enemy fleet regroup on the display, their formation tightening as they prepared for a second approach. She felt no fear watching them come. She felt something closer to patience, the same patience a spider feels watching something struggle in a web it built long before the struggle began. "They are coming back in," Daniel said. "Full formation this time." "Good," Mara replied. "Let them." Outside, in the cold vacuum of space, Threx Kalor stared at the wreckage of his confidence and made a decision he would come to regret. He ordered his fleet forward again, this time with every weapon system active, every ship committed to breaking through whatever defenses this impossible outpost was hiding. He did not yet know that Kestrel 9 was not simply defending itself. He did not yet know that everything happening so far had been, in its own quiet way, a test, a chance for the station's defenses to identify the strength of the attacking force before deciding how hard to respond. He did not yet know that the real fight had not even begun. As his ships closed the distance, weapons blazing, Threx felt the cold certainty settle deeper into his chest. Something about this outpost did not add up. No supply station generated power readings like the ones his sensors continued to report. No minor research post fielded shields capable of absorbing a full fleet volley without failing. "Commander," Vesa said, her voice tight with something close to alarm, "I am picking up movement inside the outpost. Something is opening along the lower hull." Threx turned his attention to the new data feed, watching as a section of the station's outer plating slid apart, revealing a dark opening that had not existed moments before. Whatever was hidden inside that opening, he understood instinctively that it changed everything about the battle he thought he was winning. "All ships hold position," he ordered, his voice barely steady. "I want full sensor sweeps on that opening immediately." But even as the order left his mouth, he already suspected it was too late to matter. Somewhere behind that quiet, patient silence from earlier, Kestrel 9 had been waiting for his fleet to commit fully, waiting for the moment when retreat would no longer be a simple option. Threx Kalor had come looking for an easy victory against a forgotten outpost at the edge of human space. Instead, He had found the opening move of a battle he was only beginning to understand. Behind him, unseen and unheard, 6 more ships blinked into existence at the edge of the system, arriving from a hidden position that had not shown up on any of his earlier scans. His fleet, so confident only minutes before, was no longer alone in this fight. And somewhere deep inside Kestrel 9, Mara Osei watched the numbers on her display and allowed herself a small, satisfied breath. The trap was closing. The second wave of alien ships surged forward, their weapons cutting bright lines across the darkness of space. Mara Osei watched the display with narrowed eyes as the enemy formation tightened, 6 cruisers moving in a coordinated wedge aimed directly at the weakened section of the outer shield. "They learned nothing from the first pass," said Daniel Cole, shaking his head as he tracked the incoming fleet. "They learned something," Mara replied. "They just decided it did not matter. Pride does that to people." Colonel Noah Whitfield entered the control room a moment later, his boots striking the metal floor in a steady, unhurried rhythm. He was a tall man with quiet eyes and a calm that never seemed to break, no matter what numbers appeared on the displays around him. He had commanded Kestrel 9 for 3 years, and in that time he had faced exactly this kind of overconfident attack more times than he cared to count. "Status," he said simply, stopping beside Mara's station. "Enemy fleet regrouped and committed to a second assault," Mara answered. "Shield integrity at 91%, no damage to internal systems." "And our guests outside the system?" "In position," Daniel said, "holding at the rally point, cloaked and waiting for your signal." Whitfield nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Let the enemy commit fully before we show our hand. I want them convinced this outpost is the entire fight." Mara understood the strategy perfectly, because she had helped build it. Kestrel 9 was never meant to survive on its own defenses alone. The outpost was the first layer of a much larger trap, a lure designed to draw overconfident forces into a position where retreat became impossible. The hidden ships waiting at the edge of the system were the second layer, ready to close the door the moment the enemy fleet was fully committed. On the alien flagship, Threx Kalor watched his cruisers close the distance to Kestrel 9's shield with a growing sense of unease that he refused to voice aloud. His crew needed confidence from him now more than ever, especially after the shock of the first exchange. Yet every instinct honed through years of warfare told him that pressing forward was a mistake. "Concentrate all fire on the same coordinates as before," he ordered. "If their shield held once, it will not hold twice against a focused strike." The cruisers adjusted their aim, and a storm of energy fire converged on a single point along the outpost's hull. The shield flared brilliant white under the impact, straining visibly for the first time since the battle began. Threx allowed himself a flicker of hope. Then the shield failed, not because it had been broken, he would later realize, but because it had been deliberately lowered. A calculated choice, designed to draw his fleet closer, to convince him the fight was finally turning in his favor. "Shield down," Vesa reported. "Should we press the advantage?" Threx hesitated only a moment before nodding. "All ships forward. Target the primary structure. End this quickly." His cruisers surged ahead, weapons blazing, confident that victory was finally within reach. What they did not see, hidden behind careful sensor spoofing and years of design work meant exactly for moments like this, was the true nature of Kestrel 9's outer hull. Panels that had appeared to be simple plating split apart along hidden seams, revealing weapon systems built specifically to answer overconfidence with overwhelming force. Point defense turrets emerged in staggered rows, their targeting systems already locked onto the approaching fleet before the panels had even finished opening. "New contacts," Vesa shouted, her voice cracking with alarm. "Dozens of them, all along the hull." Threx stared at the display in stunned silence as his sensors struggled to process the sudden explosion of hostile signatures. The outpost he had dismissed as a simple supply depot was, in truth, a fortress disguised as something forgettable. Every weakness he had identified during his initial approach had been a deliberate illusion, carefully maintained to encourage exactly the kind of aggressive attack he had ordered. All ships, evasive maneuvers, he commanded, but the order came too late for two of his cruisers, which found themselves caught directly in the path of the newly revealed defenses. Their shields, already weakened from the earlier exchange, buckled quickly under the concentrated fire. Inside Kestrel 9, the control room buzzed with quiet efficiency as operators tracked the shifting battle. Mara watched two enemy ships fall out of formation, their systems failing under the pressure of the Outpost's full defensive capability. "Enemy fleet is breaking formation," Daniel reported. "Two ships appear disabled. The rest are attempting to regroup." "Colonel," Mara said, glancing toward Whitfield, "this is the moment. They are fully committed and cannot retreat cleanly." Whitfield studied the tactical display for a long moment, weighing the decision with the same careful patience he brought to every choice inside this station. Then he nodded. "Signal the hidden fleet. Bring them in." Daniel relayed the order immediately, and moments later, 6 more ships dropped their cloaking fields at the edge of the system, their arrival catching Threx's remaining forces completely by surprise. These were not outdated cruisers, built to look unimpressive. They were sleek, heavily armed vessels designed for exactly this kind of decisive strike, built with technology that most of the wider human military had never even heard existed. "More ships," Vesa said, disbelief thick in her voice. "Where did they come from?" Threx did not answer immediately. He was too busy processing the full scope of the trap his fleet had walked into. What had begun as a routine strike against a forgotten outpost had transformed, piece by piece, into a carefully orchestrated ambush designed to punish exactly the kind of overconfidence he had brought into this system. "All ships break off the attack," he finally ordered, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Regroup at the outer boundary." But retreat was no longer a simple choice. The newly arrived human ships moved to cut off his fleet's escape routes with practiced precision, their formation tightening around his remaining cruisers like a closing fist. Threx watched helplessly as one of his ships attempted to break through the encirclement, only to be met with a coordinated response that disabled its engines within seconds. Back inside Kestrel 9, Mara allowed herself a small, satisfied nod as she watched the trap close fully around the alien fleet. This was the moment the entire station existed for, the culmination of years of careful planning and disguised strength. "Colonel, the enemy fleet is fully surrounded," she reported. "They have no clean path to retreat." Whitfield studied the display for a long moment before responding. "Open a channel to their flagship. I want to speak with whoever is in command." The channel opened with a burst of static, and moments later, Threx Kalor's voice came through, strained but still carrying the remnants of his earlier confidence. "You have won this engagement," he said stiffly. "What do you want from us?" Whitfield's response was calm, almost gentle, carrying none of the triumphant edge that Threx might have expected. "I want you to understand something before this goes any further. You attacked what your intelligence told you was a weak, forgotten outpost. You were wrong. And I suspect, once you report this back to your command, you will find that mistake was not unique to this system." Threx said nothing for a long moment, the weight of that statement settling over him with a slow, creeping dread. "You are saying this was not an isolated defense," he finally said. "I am saying," Whitfield replied, "that your species has a great deal to learn about how much of what you consider unimportant might not be what it seems." Inside the control room, Mara watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction, understanding the true weight behind Whitfield's carefully chosen words. Kestrel 9 was not alone in this strategy. Similar outposts existed throughout human territory, each one designed to look unremarkable while hiding capabilities that could turn any careless attack into a costly disaster. The trap had closed exactly as planned. But as Mara studied the tactical display, watching the alien fleet struggle within the tightening circle of human ships, she felt a small flicker of unease settle beneath her satisfaction. Victories like this one rarely stayed quiet for long, and she understood better than most what might come next once word of this defeat reached the wider alien command structure. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness beyond this single system, other commanders were watching and waiting to learn what had happened to Threx Kalor's fleet. And Mara suspected they would not take the lesson quietly. Threx Kalor stood motionless on his bridge, watching the tactical display with the sinking realization that his fleet's fate had already been decided the moment they entered this system. Around him, his remaining ships drifted within a tightening circle of human vessels, their weapons systems powered and ready, but their paths of retreat completely sealed off. "Commander," Vesa said quietly, "our long-range sensors are picking up something unusual, a transmission burst, sent moments ago, aimed toward the outer edge of the system." Threx turned toward her station, his exhaustion momentarily replaced by sharp focus. "Origin? It came from the outpost itself," she replied. "I believe they just alerted a wider network." The weight of that statement settled over the bridge like a physical presence. If Kestrel 9 had the capability to summon reinforcements this quickly, it meant the outpost was connected to something far larger than a single hidden fleet. Threx had assumed, foolishly he now realized, that he was facing an isolated defensive trap. The truth was beginning to look far more troubling. "Pull every scrap of intelligence we have on human border defenses," he ordered. "I want to know how many other outposts fit this same profile." Vesa's hands moved quickly across her console, pulling archived reports and cross-referencing them against updated sensor data. The results, when they appeared, made her pause before speaking. "Commander, there are 17 other outposts along the human frontier with matching classification profiles. Small population, minimal listed defenses, low strategic priority according to our previous assessments." Threx felt something cold settle in his chest. 17 outposts, 17 potential traps, each one disguised exactly as Kestrel 9 had been, each one possibly hiding the same overwhelming capability that had just crushed his confident assault. "This was never about one outpost," he said quietly, almost to himself. "This is a pattern." Inside Kestrel 9, the control room had shifted from tense focus to a quieter, more deliberate rhythm as the immediate threat of the alien fleet's aggression settled into a standoff. Mara Osei studied the display showing the tightening circle of human ships around the remaining alien cruisers, watching for any sign that the enemy commander might attempt something reckless. "They are not moving," Daniel Cole said, glancing up from his console. "No weapons charge, no attempt to break formation." "They are thinking," Mara replied, "which means their commander is smarter than most who come through here." Colonel Whitfield stood nearby, arms folded, his eyes fixed on the same display. He had seen this exact moment play out before, the pause where an enemy commander realized the situation had shifted entirely against them and had to decide whether pride or survival would guide their next choice. "Open the channel again," Whitfield said. "Let us see what kind of commander we are dealing with." The channel connected, and Threx Kalor's voice came through, quieter now, stripped of the earlier confidence that had defined his first transmission. "You have made your point," he said. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," Whitfield replied evenly. "You can stand down your remaining ships and allow this to end without further losses on either side, or you can continue this engagement and discover exactly how much strength this outpost has left in reserve." There was a long pause before Threx responded. "And if I stand down?" "Then your surviving crew returns home with a story worth telling their command," Whitfield said. "A story about an outpost that was never what it appeared to be." Mara watched the exchange carefully, understanding the deeper strategy behind Whitfield's offer. This was not simply about winning a single engagement. It was about ensuring the lesson from this battle spread as widely and as convincingly as possible throughout alien command structures. A defeated fleet, limping home with tales of an impossible defense, would do more to protect human territory than a fleet destroyed entirely, its knowledge lost along with its ships. On the alien flagship, Threx weighed his limited options with the clarity of a commander who understood the mathematics of a lost battle. His remaining ships were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and completely surrounded. Continuing the fight would accomplish nothing beyond the total loss of his crew and vessels. Standing down carried its own weight, the shame of returning home having lost so badly to what intelligence reports had labeled an insignificant target, but shame was survivable in a way that destruction was not. "Stand down all weapons systems," he finally ordered, his voice heavy with the decision. "Signal the human commander that we accept the terms." Vesa relayed the order, and across the alien fleet, weapons powered down one by one, the tension in the system easing into something closer to a wary, uneasy calm. Inside Kestrel 9's control room, a quiet murmur of relief passed through the operators as the immediate threat of continued conflict faded. "They are standing down," Daniel confirmed. "All weapons offline across the enemy fleet." Whitfield allowed himself a small nod of satisfaction, though his expression remained carefully measured. Victories like this one required as much caution in their aftermath as they did during the fighting itself. An enemy commander who felt humiliated rather than simply defeated might carry resentment home that could shape future decisions in unpredictable ways. "Bring the recovery teams online," he said. "I want our people checking for any damage across the outer hull sections, and I want a full report on the disabled enemy ships before we allow any further movement in this system." Mara moved to coordinate the recovery effort, her focus shifting from the tension of active combat to the careful, methodical work of securing the aftermath. This part of the job rarely received the same attention as the fighting itself, but she understood its importance just as clearly. A battle won carelessly in its final moments could still unravel into disaster if the details were mishandled. As the recovery teams began their work, Whitfield stepped away from the main display and gestured for Mara to join him near a quieter section of the control room. "You did well today," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear it clearly. "We all did," Mara replied. "The plan worked exactly as designed. Plans always work exactly as designed until the moment they do not," Whitfield said, a faint trace of dry humor breaking through his usual composure. "Today we were fortunate that the enemy commander chose caution over recklessness in the end. Not every commander will make that same choice." Mara considered his words carefully, understanding the deeper truth behind them. Kestrel 9 had succeeded this time because Threx Kalor, despite his earlier overconfidence, had ultimately proven himself capable of recognizing a lost cause and choosing survival over pride. A different commander, one driven by desperation or blind loyalty to a failing strategy, might have pushed the engagement into something far more costly for both sides. "Do you think this will change how they approach future engagements?" Mara asked. Whitfield's expression grew thoughtful. "It will change how this particular commander approaches things, certainly. Whether the wider lesson spreads depends entirely on how honestly he reports what happened here today. Pride has a way of shaping reports in ways that do not always serve the truth." As if summoned by the conversation itself, a new alert flashed across the main display, drawing both their attention immediately. Daniel's voice cut through the room, tight with renewed concern. "Colonel, we have a problem. Long-range sensors just picked up a second alien fleet entering the system boundary, much larger than the first." The quiet calm that had settled over the control room shattered instantly, replaced by a sharp return of focused urgency. Mara moved quickly back to her station, pulling up the incoming data with practiced speed. "How large is this fleet?" Whitfield asked, his voice steady despite the sudden shift in circumstances. "Sensors are still refining the count," Daniel said, "but early estimates put it well beyond anything we saw in the first wave. This could be a full battle group." Mara felt her earlier satisfaction give way to a sharper, more focused tension. If a second fleet had been dispatched this quickly, it meant Threx Kalor's initial transmission back to his command had likely included more than just a routine status report. Someone out there had decided this engagement warranted a much stronger response. "Colonel," she said, "if this new fleet is responding directly to the first engagement, they may already know exactly what kind of defenses to expect." Whitfield's jaw tightened slightly, the first visible sign of genuine concern she had seen from him throughout the entire encounter. Then we adjust our approach accordingly. Signal the hidden reserve fleet to maintain full readiness. I want every defensive system on this outpost brought to maximum capacity immediately. The control room shifted into a new rhythm of urgent activity as operators across the station began preparing for what promised to be a far more serious confrontation than the one they had just concluded. Mara watched the approaching fleet's data populate across her display, the sheer scale of the incoming force settling heavily over her earlier confidence. This was no longer a simple matter of punishing an overconfident raid. This was the beginning of something much larger, and Kestrel 9, despite everything it had already proven capable of, now faced a test that would push every hidden capability the outpost possessed to its absolute limit. Threx Kalor, watching the same approaching fleet from his own damaged flagship, felt a complicated mixture of relief and dread settle over him. Relief that reinforcements had arrived to potentially salvage the disaster of his initial assault. Dread at the realization that whoever commanded this new fleet would not make the same mistakes he had. "This is Fleet Commander Draxus Ven," a new voice announced over the open channel, carrying an authority that made even Threx straighten slightly in his seat. "Stand down and prepare to explain exactly how a minor outpost defeated an entire strike fleet." Inside Kestrel 9, Mara listened to the transmission with a growing sense that the true battle for this system had only just begun. Fleet Commander Draxus Ven's voice still echoed through the control room when Whitfield turned to face his team, his expression calm but his eyes sharper than before. The arrival of a much larger force had changed the shape of this engagement entirely, and everyone in the room understood that the careful, measured approach used against Threx Kalor's initial assault would not be enough this time. "Bring up full sensor data on the new fleet," Whitfield said. "I want ship counts, weapon classifications, and formation patterns before they finish their approach." Mara worked quickly alongside Daniel and the rest of the operators, pulling together a clearer picture of the threat now bearing down on their position. The numbers that populated her display were sobering. Draxus Ven commanded a force nearly triple the size of the First Fleet, organized with a precision that suggested extensive combat experience rather than the overconfidence that had doomed Threx Kalor's assault. "This is not a punishment fleet," Mara said, studying the formation pattern closely. "This is a proper battle group, built for sustained engagement." Whitfield nodded slowly, absorbing the information without any visible sign of panic. "Then we stop treating this as a defensive stand and start treating it as the real test Kestrel 9 was built for." He turned toward the wider room, raising his voice slightly so every operator could hear him clearly. "Everyone, listen carefully. What we do in the next several minutes will determine whether this outpost survives as more than a smoking wreck. I want full coordination between our internal defenses and the reserve fleet. No hesitation, no wasted movement." A quiet, focused determination settled over the room in response, the kind of steady resolve that came from months of preparation finally being put to its true purpose. Mara felt her earlier tension sharpen into something closer to readiness, the nervous uncertainty replaced by the practiced calm of training taking hold. Outside, Draxus Ven's fleet began its approach with a discipline that immediately set it apart from the earlier assault. Rather than a single aggressive push, the alien ship spread into a wide formation designed to approach the outpost from multiple angles simultaneously, minimizing the effectiveness of any concentrated defensive response. "They learned from Threx Kalor's mistake," Daniel observed, watching the formation spread wider across the display. "Then we adjust as well," Whitfield replied. "Reserve fleet, hold position, but prepare to intercept any ships that attempt to flank our secondary defense grid." The hidden human vessels that had earlier sealed off Threx Kalor's retreat shifted subtly in response to the new order, repositioning themselves to counter the wider approach of the incoming fleet without revealing their full capabilities too early. Mara appreciated the careful restraint in Whitfield's strategy. Even now, facing a significantly larger threat, He refused to reveal every advantage the outpost possessed until the moment demanded it. As Draxus Ven's fleet closed the distance, the alien commander's voice returned over the open channel, carrying a confidence that felt earned rather than careless. "I have reviewed the reports of your earlier engagement," Draxus said. "Clever tactics, disguised strength, a well-executed trap. I respect the effort, but I did not bring an entire battle group to fall for the same tricks." Whitfield's response carried no trace of concern, only a quiet, measured steadiness. "Then perhaps you should ask yourself why an outpost this small was ever worth the effort of an entire battle group in the first place." There was a brief pause before Draxus answered, his tone shifting slightly. "Because, whatever secrets your people are hiding out here, my command wants them understood, not ignored." The exchange ended there, both sides settling into the tense quiet that preceded serious conflict. Mara watched the alien formation continue its approach, every ship moving with careful precision designed to minimize the effectiveness of Kestrel 9's defenses. "They are testing our response patterns," she said, probing before committing fully. "Then we give them exactly what they expect to see," Whitfield replied, "right up until the moment we do not." The first exchange of fire began moments later, a careful, measured series of strikes from the approaching fleet, aimed at testing the outpost's shield capacity without fully committing to an all-out assault. Kestrel 9's defenses responded in kind, absorbing the initial strikes with practiced efficiency while deliberately holding back the full extent of its capabilities. Mara tracked the exchange closely, noting how Draxus Ven's fleet adjusted its tactics with each passing minute, searching for weaknesses in the outpost's response patterns. It was a careful, intelligent approach, the kind that required equally careful countermeasures to overcome. "Colonel," she said, "if they continue testing at this rate, they will eventually identify the gaps in our defensive coverage." Whitfield's expression remained calm, though a flicker of calculation passed behind his eyes. "Then it is time to stop letting them dictate the terms of this engagement." He turned toward the communications station. "Signal the reserve fleet. Full engagement. Focus strike on their forward formation. I want their probing attack turned into a costly mistake." The order rippled outward, and moments later the hidden human vessels that had been holding position at the edge of the system surged forward with sudden, decisive speed. Their appearance caught Draxus Ven's forward ships completely off guard, the careful probing pattern shattering under the weight of a focused counterattack they had not anticipated so early in the engagement. "Enemy formation breaking," Daniel reported, excitement creeping into his otherwise steady voice. "Their forward ships are scrambling to adjust." Mara watched the shift in momentum with quiet satisfaction, understanding the deeper strategy behind Whitfield's timing. By allowing Draxus Ven's fleet to commit to a careful, probing approach, Kestrel 9 had drawn the enemy formation into a position where a sudden, decisive counterattack could inflict maximum disruption before the alien commander had the chance to fully adapt. On his flagship, Draxus Ven watched the sudden appearance of the human reserve fleet with sharp, focused attention, his earlier confidence tempered by genuine respect for the tactical skill on display. "They held their strongest ships in reserve the entire time," he said, more to himself than to his crew. "Clever." "Orders, Commander?" Vessa's counterpart on his own bridge asked urgently. Draxus considered the shifting battle for a long moment before responding. "Adjust formation. Do not retreat, but do not commit further ships until we understand the full scope of their reserve capability." His fleet responded quickly, pulling back from the initial engagement zone while maintaining a defensive posture designed to absorb the human counterattack without collapsing entirely. It was a careful, measured response, exactly the kind of discipline that separated an experienced commander from an overconfident one. Inside Kestrel 9, Whitfield studied the shifting battle with quiet focus, recognizing the skill behind Draxus Ven's adjustment. "He is not going to make the same mistake as the first commander," he said. "This will require more than a single decisive strike." Mara nodded, already calculating the next phase of their strategy. Then we keep pressing, force him to commit resources faster than he wants to. The battle continued in earnest. Waves of coordinated strikes exchanged between the two fleets as both sides searched for the decisive advantage that would tip the engagement fully in their favor. Kestrel 9's hidden defenses, combined with the reserve fleet's sudden strike, had shattered Draxus Ven's initial confidence, but his careful, experienced response prevented the engagement from collapsing into the same one-sided disaster that had defined the earlier fight against Threx Kalor. Hours seemed to blur together as the control room maintained its focused rhythm, operators tracking shifting formations and adjusting defensive patterns with practiced efficiency. Mara felt the weight of sustained concentration settle over her, the adrenaline of the early engagement giving way to the steady, grinding focus required for a longer fight. "Colonel," Daniel said eventually, his voice carrying a note of cautious optimism, "enemy fleet efficiency is dropping. Their coordinated strikes are becoming less precise." Whitfield studied the data carefully before responding. "Fatigue or damage accumulation?" "Both, likely," Mara said. "Sustained engagement favors us. Our systems were built for exactly this kind of extended defense." A slow, careful understanding settled over the room as the true nature of Kestrel 9's design became fully apparent even to those who had helped build it. The Outpost had never been meant to win through a single decisive strike. It had been designed to outlast, to grind down even a well-prepared and disciplined enemy through sustained, coordinated resistance. Draxus Ven recognized the shifting tide of the battle before his own crew fully articulated it. The careful calculations of an experienced commander, weighing the diminishing returns of continued engagement against the mounting losses his fleet had already sustained. "This outpost was built to survive exactly this kind of extended assault," he said quietly, watching his own formation struggle to maintain the same precision that had defined their earlier approach. He understood, with the clarity that came from years of hard-won experience, that continuing this engagement risked transforming a costly but survivable retreat into a catastrophic defeat that would leave his entire battle group crippled, far from any support. "All ships," he finally ordered, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "Prepare to disengage. We have learned what we came here to learn." Inside Kestrel 9, Mara watched the alien formation begin its careful withdrawal, the tension of sustained combat slowly easing into cautious relief. Whitfield studied the retreating fleet with an expression that carried more thoughtfulness than triumph. "They are leaving," Daniel confirmed. "Full withdrawal pattern." Whitfield allowed himself a small nod, though his focus remained fixed on the wider implications of what had just occurred. This was never going to end with total victory today. Draxus Ven is too skilled a commander for that. What matters now is what he reports back to his command, and how that report shapes what comes next. Mara considered his words carefully, understanding the deeper truth behind this engagement's conclusion. Kestrel 9 had survived, had even inflicted significant losses on a much larger and more disciplined force. But the true consequences of this battle would extend far beyond the boundaries of this single system. As the alien fleet's ships faded from sensor range, retreating toward the edge of the system and beyond, Mara felt the full weight of the day's events finally settle over her. What had begun as a routine defensive stand against an overconfident raid had transformed, step by step, into a battle that would likely echo far beyond this quiet, hidden corner of human space. And somewhere out there, among the retreating alien ships, she suspected the true consequences of this day were only just beginning to take shape. Weeks passed before the true scale of what happened at Kestrel 9 became clear, and by then, Mara Osei had returned to something resembling the Outpost's normal rhythm, though nothing about the station felt quite the same as it had before the attack. The repair crews had finished patching the visible damage along the outer hull, and the daily routines of monitoring and maintenance had resumed, but an undercurrent of quiet anticipation ran through every shift. She stood now in the observation deck, watching the stars drift slowly past the reinforced viewport, when Colonel Whitfield joined her, a datapad tucked under one arm and an expression that suggested he was carrying news worth sharing. "Command just forwarded an intelligence summary," he said, handing her the pad. "You will want to see this." Mara took the device and scrolled through the report, her eyes widening slightly as the details unfolded. Intercepted communications, gathered through channels she was not entirely cleared to know the origin of, painted a picture of growing unease spreading through alien command structures. Draxus Ven's report on the battle had been thorough and, notably, honest about the scale of the defeat his forces had suffered. "He did not downplay it," Mara said, surprised. "No," Whitfield agreed, "which is exactly why this matters. A commander with his reputation admitting defeat carries far more weight than a dozen exaggerated victory claims from lesser officers. His honesty is going to cause exactly the kind of reassessment we hoped for." Mara continued reading, absorbing details about renewed scrutiny being applied to other supposedly minor human outposts scattered along the frontier. Reports indicated growing hesitation among alien commanders when it came to targeting any human position previously classified as low priority, a hesitation born directly from the lessons of Kestrel 9. "They think we might have more outposts like this one," she said. "We do," Whitfield replied simply. 17 others, as it turns out, though not all of them share the exact same design or capability. Some are simpler decoys. Others are far more heavily armed than even Kestrel 9. The uncertainty itself is the point. An enemy who cannot tell which targets are truly weak and which are hidden traps becomes far more cautious about aggressive expansion. Mara considered the wider strategy with a growing appreciation for its elegance. Kestrel 9 had never needed to defeat every enemy fleet that approached it. It only needed to demonstrate, convincingly and repeatedly, that appearances along the human frontier could not be trusted. That single lesson, spread through honest reports like the one Draxus Ven had filed, would do more to protect human territory than any single overwhelming show of force ever could. "What happens to Threx Kalor?" she asked, curious about the fate of the commander whose overconfidence had started this entire chain of events. Whitfield's expression grew thoughtful. "Reports suggest he has been reassigned to a less prominent post. Not disgraced entirely, but certainly no longer trusted with independent command decisions. His mistake will follow him for a long time." Mara nodded slowly, understanding the quiet mercy in that outcome. Threx had made a costly error, but his final decision to stand down rather than continue a hopeless fight had likely saved what remained of his crew. That single choice, born from wisdom rather than cowardice, had earned him a measure of continued service rather than total ruin. Elena Faraday, one of the senior operators who had worked alongside Mara throughout the entire engagement, joined them on the observation deck a few minutes later, her expression carrying the same mixture of relief and lingering tension that seemed to have settled over most of the station's crew since the battle. "Colonel," Elena said, "Command wants to schedule a full debrief with the senior staff. They are calling it a case study for the wider defense network." Whitfield nodded, unsurprised by the request. "Understandable. What we learned here needs to reach the other outposts before another commander gets the chance to test their defenses under less favorable circumstances." "Do you think it will work?" Mara asked. "The wider strategy, I mean. Convincing an entire alien coalition that our frontier is more dangerous than it looks?" Whitfield considered the question carefully before answering, his gaze drifting back toward the quiet stars beyond the viewport. Strategy like this never provides permanent certainty. It only buys time, and time is often the most valuable resource a smaller, more vulnerable force can secure against a larger enemy. Every day the wider alien coalition hesitates to test our frontier fully is another day we have to strengthen what we have built here. Mara found comfort in the honesty of that answer, appreciating Whitfield's refusal to overstate the certainty of their success. Kestrel 9 had won an important battle, but the wider war, the quiet, ongoing contest of intelligence, deception, and careful strategy that defined the true nature of humanity's conflict with this alien coalition, remained far from settled. Over the following weeks, Mara watched the ripple effects of the Kestrel 9 engagement spread further than she had initially expected. New intelligence reports arrived regularly, detailing shifting alien patrol patterns along the frontier, increased caution around previously targeted outposts, and growing internal debate within alien command structures about the wisdom of continued aggressive expansion into human territory. One report in particular caught her attention during a routine briefing, detailing a conversation intercepted between two alien officers discussing the wider implications of the battle. The exchange, translated and forwarded through careful intelligence channels, revealed a growing unease that extended far beyond simple military caution. "They are saying the entire concept of a weak human border position no longer makes sense to them," Daniel Cole said, sharing the translated report with the rest of the senior staff during a debrief session. "Some of their commanders are recommending a complete halt on frontier operations until they can develop better intelligence-gathering methods." "That buys us exactly the kind of time Whitfield mentioned," Mara said, exchanging a glance with the colonel across the briefing table. Whitfield allowed himself a rare, small smile. "It does. And every month that hesitation continues is another month our other outposts have to refine their own defenses, learn from what happened here, and prepare for whatever comes next." The briefing continued for another hour, covering detailed logistics and strategic adjustments that would need to be implemented across the wider Kestrel network based on the lessons learned during the engagement. Mara contributed her own observations throughout, offering insights drawn from her first-hand experience coordinating the outpost defenses during the most intense moments of the battle. As the session finally drew to a close, Whitfield addressed the room one last time, his tone carrying the weight of quiet reflection rather than triumphant celebration. "What happened here should serve as a reminder to all of us," he said. "We won this engagement not through overwhelming force alone, but through patience, careful planning, and the willingness to appear weaker than we truly are, until the moment demanded otherwise. That lesson extends beyond military strategy. It reflects something deeper about how we approach every challenge facing us out here on the frontier." Mara found herself nodding along with the rest of the room, understanding the deeper truth behind his words. Kestrel 9 had never been designed simply as a hidden fortress waiting to punish careless attackers. It represented something more fundamental about humanity's approach to survival against a vast, uncertain galaxy filled with threats far larger and more numerous than any single outpost could hope to face directly. Patience, preparation, the willingness to endure underestimation until the moment came to prove it wrong. As the briefing room slowly emptied, Mara lingered for a moment longer, studying the star charts displayed across the far wall, tracing the scattered positions of the other hidden outposts spread throughout human territory. 17 other Kestrels, each one waiting quietly at the edge of contested space, each one carrying the same careful blend of disguised strength and patient resolve that had defined this station's defense. She thought about Threx Kalor, reassigned and humbled, but still serving, carrying forward the lesson of his defeat into whatever future engagements awaited him. She thought about Draxus Ven, whose honest report had done more to protect human territory than any exaggerated victory could have accomplished. And she thought about the quiet, ongoing contest playing out across the wider frontier, a contest defined not by single decisive battles, but by the slow accumulation of caution, respect, and hard-earned uncertainty. Kestrel 9 remained exactly what it had always been designed to be, an unremarkable outpost, drifting quietly at the edge of human space, appearing weak and unimportant to anyone who did not look closely enough to see the truth hidden beneath its worn, unremarkable surface. And somewhere out there, across the vast darkness of the frontier, other commanders were beginning to learn that lesson for themselves, one hesitant, cautious decision at a time. Mara turned away from the star charts and made her way back toward the control room, ready to continue the quiet, patient work of preparing for whatever came next. The battle at Kestrel 9 had ended, but the wider story it represented, the careful, ongoing defense of a fragile and uncertain frontier, continued exactly as it always had, quietly, patiently, and far more powerfully than anyone watching from the outside would ever expect.